Hey everyone, this is Ahsan Raza from Century 21 Innovative Realty. Welcome to episode number 3 of my webinar series. And today we're going to cover one of my favorite topics in real estate, and that's pre-construction investment. And I've got the perfect guest on the show who's going to help us break down the pre-construction investment strategy. I've got Laura Stewart, pre-construction expert. How are you doing, Laura?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I couldn't think of anybody else or anybody better than you to cover this topic. So what I want to do is, for the people that are listening, I want this to be almost like a pre-construction playbook, right? So if you're looking for pre-construction or have thought about it, at some point in time, we're going to be going through an actual step-by-step checklist, talking about what you should be looking for, what are some due diligence you should be looking for, how can you actually win and build wealth in pre-construction. And I've got Laura, she's going to be talking about that as well. So let's just get right into it. I guess the first question I have for you is, before we get into the details, is what exactly is a pre-construction investment strategy?
Yeah, so I guess for the purposes of today, I'm going to be speaking about condos specifically.
Right.
Obviously, pre-construction can mean single detached homes, but I think what's mostly relevant probably for your investor clients is condos, because that's where we see most investors picking up projects. So what is a pre-construction condo? It's essentially you purchasing a unit based off of looking on blueprints. So you'll be one unit on a floor of a 10-story to 38-story building. You're purchasing it today, so you're signing that agreement of purchase and sale today, but you're not actually closing on that project for about 3 or 4 years while the building gets built.
Yep, awesome. So just like Laura said, it's not a resale property, you're actually buying for the future, and it's a blueprint, so that way, you won't close today, you'll close after a few years, but it's a great strategy for a lot of people who might want to get into the real estate market. Myself personally, the way I got started was through pre-construction. So my first investment property was a small condo in the suburbs in Markham. And what I was looking for was certain items that would basically help me get appreciation in the property. So we'll talk about that next in terms of due diligence. And one of the first things that we look for is the location, which is very important. So in your opinion, what are some things that we should consider when we're talking about location?
Yeah, location is probably the most important piece of the puzzle. I help about, I think at this point, over 2,100 people do this strategy. And so I always let them know that I get about 70 to 80 projects on my desk every single year. And I don't put my clients in those projects because they don't simply meet some of the basic criteria, which I think we'll go over in a little bit more detail. But the first criteria I look at from the start is the location.
Right.
Do I feel like this property is going to appreciate over time? Because that's really what we're looking for. At the same time, we're looking for tenants. Right. So is this project going to be built in an area where we think there's going to be a lot of tenants? So when you look at the Greater Toronto landscape, it's pretty simple. Toronto is kind of the sun, right? That's where everyone wants to work, or that's where everyone is working, I should say. That's where all the jobs are. So the majority of people who do move into the city, they want to be in that downtown core so that they can get to work very easily and quickly. So of course that would be an ideal location, but with a location like that comes high price point.
Right.
So the further you move away from the downtown core, you want to start looking for other factors. So transit's very important. Why is transit important? Because the further you get away from the downtown core, now people can't walk to work. So how are they getting to work? They're either taking the subway. That would be very ideal for there to be a subway stop in close proximity to your property. Usually anywhere within a 500 meter radius from your property, those tend to appreciate a little bit faster. And the tenants tend to want to live there more as well. So you have a better selection of tenants within a 500 meter radius from a subway station. Next to that, you'd have LRT. After that, you'd probably have streetcar stop and then a bus station. Right. So those are kind of the factors. Another factor which might help would be like purchasing a property that's near major highways, because a lot of people are still driving into the downtown core. So having like a 5-minute access to a major highway is also very, very beneficial. And the final thing that I think would make a location really great would be what's called a master plan community. So master plan community is usually a big parcel of land that currently has not much development on it. Maybe it's being gentrified, and either the city or perhaps multiple levels of government are investing into this one area to really build it out over a handful of years, if not a decade or so. this area would have commercial space, it would have retail space, as well as residential space. And so what makes that kind of location so great is that tenants don't really need to leave, because chances are the tenants that you're getting are actually working in that neighborhood. So we say, like, you live, work, and play all within the same, say, block of land. And so those tend to be great investments as well.
Yeah, and even for myself personally, like, when I bought my pre-construction, what I did was I did my due diligence, and I found out that beside my condo, there's going to be a brand new bus terminal that's going to be built. And in Markham, it's the York Region Transit. And so we bought our condo for $430,000, I believe. Literally the week after that was built, we saw almost a $40,000 appreciation. And the rentability was easy, the appreciation was higher. So this is what Laura means when we're talking about transit location. The closer you are to these elements, the better the rentability, the better the appreciation. And if you can't afford to get something in, let's say, the downtown core, there are other areas that still fulfill this criteria. It might be better pricing if you're looking to get it for the first time. So, Laura, we talked about transit, we talked about master plan community. How important is it to choose the right builder?
Oh yeah, this is very important. And unfortunately, I've learned this a bit of the hard way. So hopefully your viewers and listeners didn't learn it the hard way, and you guys can all just learn from me. Do the due diligence on the builder.
Right.
So make sure you're Googling who the builder is, looking at their website, checking out to see if they've built other properties. And I don't just mean that they have other properties under construction or for sale. I mean, have they actually closed? Like, are people living in that property today? The reason that's important is one of the biggest risks that come with purchasing pre-construction condos is that the building never gets built. Right. So here you are as an investor paying your deposits over the course of the next year to 2 years. The developer is holding your money. Technically, the developer's lawyer is holding your money in a trust account. And your money, you're hoping that this is how you're going to make money, right? That's the whole point of this. But what can happen in time is that sometimes supply chain issues or labor disputes, or they didn't get permits and zoning, so they can't actually build, and developers will actually cancel a project, and your money's been tied up for 2 years. The good news is you do get your money back. So I don't want anyone to freak out right now and be like, oh my God, you don't lose your money, okay? You do get the money back. But you've lost the opportunity cost of that money to make you any money. Exactly. And so that's very unfortunate. And so that's a big, big risk. Look, there's 100 at any given time pre-construction projects going on in Toronto. And about 1% of those ever get canceled. Right. They make the most noise on the news, right? Yeah. They make all the headlines. I hear people talking about it at cocktail parties. They're like, oh, pre-construction, you should never buy those. The developers cancel them and you lose all their money. That's not actually true. It's really a small percentage. I've done, like I said, I've put over 2,100 people in this exact type of investment along with myself. And I've probably, of those, had 48 people who actually, unfortunately, the developer canceled. It happened to be the same developer over 2 projects. Lesson learned. You never want to be the guinea pig for these developers. So pay a little bit more, even if you have to, just because it's a good name, because those developers will probably go along with the project and complete it, even if they're bleeding money, simply because their reputation means more to them than any one project.
Right. Right. Awesome. So builder obviously is very important, like Laura described. So now we've talked about due diligence. The next topic that I want to cover is going to be incentives. So when you're looking for pre-construction, there are certain things that you should be looking for before ahead of time. And some incentives that come to mind would be, first access pricing. So people are going to wonder, what does that exactly mean? So if you can kind of cover and unpack first access pricing, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the ways that you do win in this investment opportunity. I know you'd mentioned we'll touch on that. This is like the coolest part of pre-construction condos, in all honesty. I don't have another word than cool, because the developer is forcing the appreciation. Right. So you have passive appreciation, which is the market just doing its thing based on market conditions. But forced appreciation is the developer intentionally increasing the price for future buyers, so that by the time we're on our 3rd, 4th increase, you've made anywhere between $40,000, $60,000, $80,000, and you haven't even done anything. Right. And so what first access pricing means is you're pairing up with a realtor, like someone like yourself, who has access to these amazing projects very early on in the sales cycle. You get in first, and then you get to take advantage of the developer increasing the pricing over time for future buyers. Where people kind of miss the mark is when they're walking down the street and they see a sales center open and it says open to the public. At that point, it's too late. If you see it as a regular person, you're allowed to walk in.
Right.
You've missed the mark. You can still do well, just like a regular resale deal, like you're going to win in real estate over time. But you're missing out on that sweet spot where you got in earlier and you got to take advantage of all those price increases.
Yeah, and it's all about trying to maximize your value, right, at the same time. So that's really important. The second incentive that we want to look for is the right to lease during occupancy. So if you're familiar with pre-construction or if you're not, there's two types of closings. The first one is interim occupancy or interim closing. Then you have your final closing. And I'll let Laura sort of unpack what that means entirely. Like, what is an occupancy period and why is it, really, really helpful to have that incentive where you can actually lease the property during this occupancy period?
Yeah, this period is actually pretty specific to Ontario. It's not across Canada that this happens. The reason for it is that it takes a little bit of time between the moment the building's built and the moment that the developer can get the condominium corporation established with the city. We're backlogged here, unfortunately, because we have so many of these buildings happening all at the same time. And so because of that, there's that delayed period. But at this point, the building's ready. It's undergone safety inspections. People can move in, right? Now, if you think of yourself as the end user, you're grateful to move in. You've been waiting for this moment. You didn't want to pay rent anymore. But unfortunately, the developer can't even pass you title until you close, which again happens like 6 to 8 months later, or once they're registered with the city. And so you can't get a mortgage, you can't close on the property, but you can live in it. And so what the developers do is they pay you what's called an occupancy fee. Including in the occupancy fee is your property taxes, your maintenance fees, so those two fees you'd be paying anyway, and the interest portion that the developer's paying for your unit. Right. What you're not paying, though, is your mortgage. And so you can actually live as an end user for cheaper during this time because of that, you're not paying the mortgage. As an investor, though, you have no intention of moving in. And so you're thinking, okay, I'm forced to pay this fee, but can I recoup it by renting it out? Some developers do not allow you as an investor to rent out your unit during this time because they don't want to adopt a tenant. The developer still owns the unit. And so let's say for some reason you default and you don't close on this like upon registration in 8 months. Now they have to keep that tenant. And they don't always want to do that. They don't want to be responsible for that because it's harder to sell after that. But we only work with developers who do allow it, who understand that my investor clients simply won't buy in your project if you don't allow this, because what we've ended up doing is taking a time where it would have been negative cash flow, quite a bit of money, all those expenses that I said, and now we've flipped it on its head and you're actually going to see the most positive cash flow because you're still getting your same rent, but again, you don't have that mortgage payment. So we've made that 6 to 8 month time actually a very advantageous time.
So that can be your most positive cash flow period, in fact,
exactly.
Right? That makes sense. So right to lease during occupancy, we want to look for that. We're looking for a new pre-construction. And the next incentive that I want to talk to you about is the right to assign. An assignment clause, as many of you guys know. So what is an assignment clause, Laura? And then also, can you talk about when you're buying into pre-construction, and what should your intent be? Should it be to, I'm going to buy, I'm going to flip and assign, or do you want to buy and hold long term? And if we're going to do that, then why even have the assignment clause? What's the purpose of it?
So essentially, the developer doesn't want to compete with themselves for sales. And so you do need to be careful about the time period. What you can't do is say purchase on first access pricing, and then in a week from now, when prices go up by $20,000, $30,000, try to sell your paperwork right away. It doesn't work like that. It really is to be used, to, as far as I'm concerned, as a safety blanket. That, I think, should be the intent of going into a purchase like this, is that you're not going in wanting to flip the paper, thinking that you're going to make a whole bunch of money. Although I do have clients, and that is their strategy. And I'll work with clients like that, but I just make sure I educate them up front and say, that's a great strategy. You can make good money in it, but do understand what the risks are. Let's say we have pandemic 3.0, 4.0, 5, whatever, I don't know what phase we're in, and prices either halt or start to drop. And all of a sudden, you're not making that profit that you originally thought you did. But you never set yourself up to actually close on this property, and you're forced to sell. You might end up forcing to sell at a loss. And that could be very unfortunate. So I always tell my clients, let's go in with the intention of closing on the property so that if we end up doing really, really well on it and it appreciates a lot in value, we have the option then to either close on it or to sell it. Even in that respect, depending where anyone is in their life journey, for me, like I have 2 pre-construction condos, I plan on closing on them and getting the tenant in it because I actually want to hold these.
You want to buy and hold.
I want to buy and hold. That's my overall macro thesis for investing, and so I plan on holding these for a long period of time.
And I guess the assignment clause, like it's a security blanket. It's a way where if you're having any financial troubles or you've got cash flow issues, it's kind of a way to get out, I guess, if you can. But we don't want to, have that intention going in. We want to have the intention of buying and holding long term. But like Laura said, the assignment clause gives you an out if needed at that point, right?
Exactly.
So the next incentive that we're going to talk about is development fees, and to make sure that they are capped. Development fees, Laura, what does that mean and why should we have them capped from the builder?
So development fees happen on closing, and this is what happens when the developer registers the unit with the city or the project with the city. The city will then charge the developer a bunch of taxes, fees, and levies. The developer, of course, then just passes those fees and levies along to you, the buyer. So these types of fees are really because the city has to pay towards the infrastructure that happens around the building. It's not like we just put a building in the middle of nowhere and that's the community. You got to think we need to put sidewalks in. We need to put curbs in, new roads perhaps, stop signs, stoplights. Maybe we need to put schools in the area to help facilitate all the people who are now going to be living in that building. So a lot goes into creating these things, and the city bears a lot of that. And of course, they expect that the people who are going to actually be utilizing all of those amenities pay a bit toward it as well. So now that we know what the fees are, the idea around the cap development charge is that because the building's not built for 3-4 years, there's really no way to know or to gauge what the exact figure is going to be on closing. We don't know what government's going to be. We don't know what they spent in order to create all these amenities. And so there's no way to know. But instead of just being slapped with a $35,000, $40,000, $50,000 bill on closing, which we have seen in Toronto, and people not saving accordingly and being kind of flustered on closing, not knowing where to find these funds, we just say, well, let's just cap them up front. And so we only work with developers who cap these projects. The way the cap works is, let's say this project caps it, the development charges at $10,000, and the city only charges $8,000. Well, then you're only required as the buyer to pay $8,000. So that's great. You just saved yourself $2,000, but you saved it, so you would have been covered, and now you can do what you want with that additional $2,000. On the flip side, let's say the city charges $15,000, but you were capped at $10,000. Well, now the developer is required to pay the additional $5,000.
Right.
And so it protects you in both cases.
Yeah, and you're not hit with the big surprise on closing day, like a $30,000, $40,000 closing cost at the end.
I've seen it, and it gets dicey at the end. People can't close, they can't come up with the money.
Yeah, it's a big amount.
It's a big amount, it can be very stressful. So yes, we understand that, yes, I'm not saying $10,000 isn't a big amount, but you want to just make sure, let me know what I need to save for, and I'll plan accordingly over the course of the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, and so we want to make sure these things are obviously in writing as well, right? When it comes down to it, which kind of segues into our next subject, things that you should know when you're getting into the pre-construction market. The first thing I'll talk about is the due diligence period. How many days is that, and what is the due diligence period exactly? You've worked a lot in that aspect of things, right?
So automatically in the province of Ontario, I'm just speaking about Ontario, so if you're listening and watching from a different province or country, this is Ontario. I don't know what the rules are elsewhere. You have an automatic 10-day, they call it a cooling period. I consider it more of a due diligence period. Quite honestly, where it gives you the time to take your contract and go get it reviewed by a lawyer. That's really the most important, and of course gives you time to read it yourself.
Right.
But these contracts are very long. The agreement alone is 50 pages or so, and then the condo docs are an additional 250 pages. So it's a lot of reading. So I just try to make sure that I have my lawyer, who's a pre-construction expert, they review the agreement to let me know if there's anything that I need to be aware of.
Right, perfect. And then the next thing we'll talk about is HST implications. So as an investor, if you're buying for investment purposes in Ontario again, on a closing day, you will be charged an extra $24,000 on top of your closing costs. But there's a way to get that back, or most of it back. So how would one actually get that rebate of the money he paid on closing when it comes to HST?
Yeah, the good news with this is because we have kind of that split, like two closing dates, occupancy and closing, is you're right. The $24,000 is paid on the closing date. But back on occupancy, you were able to rent it out or lease it out during occupancy. That's why we got that in writing. So you should technically already have a 1-year lease agreement in place. So because you have that lease agreement, you're now going to pay the HST on closing. The very next day, you're going to submit an application to the CRA. In that application, you're going to show them that you have a 1-year lease agreement in place, and the CRA is going to open it, look at it, and say approved, and they're going to give you a rebate of $23,000 and change. You don't get the full $24,000 back, unfortunately, but that's simply because it's the government and they're doing their thing, and they're charging you to kind of open up the mail and stamp everything and send a check back to you. But the reason behind this is actually because in cities like Toronto and global cities around the world, what we see is a lot of investors buy property just to let it sit there vacant. They don't live in it. They don't plan on visiting it really. And they don't want to rent it out to other people because they don't want the wear and tear, and they don't necessarily even want to be a landlord. They're simply putting their money there to let it grow over time, and then when they need it, they'll sell the unit. The problem is in a city like Toronto specifically, we have a housing crisis that's happening. We don't have enough places for people to live in, which is why values keep going up and up. And so if people like investors are purchasing properties and they're not actually putting them up for rent, where do our renters go? And then our rent go up and up and up. And so the idea of this is if you're an investor, you're going to pay the $24,000. But if you showcase to us that you're actually renting it out and you are in fact providing housing for the community, then we're going to give you the money back. If you don't provide that housing for anybody else, you unfortunately say goodbye to $24,000.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty funny because a lot of people that I speak to, a lot of my clients, I would say in the last year or so, at least 3 of them, didn't even know they could get a rebate. So they paid the HST on closing. But they didn't realize that, you know what, I can actually get that money back. And so I followed up and I said, look, we got to get this money back. And when they got that check back, like they were all smiles. So if you bought something in the past, you haven't claimed a rebate, you still can. There's like a time limit, right, as to what you can do.
I think it's 18 months, but don't quote me on that. Honestly, the sooner from closing, the better. That's why I say, like, the very next day, get your ducks in a row. And just for everybody to know, I hear this all the time, like, oh my God, there's HST on my unit. It's not 13%. Like you said, it's just $24,000, which is not an insignificant amount of money. You know now that you need to pay it, so just make sure you have that money. That's on top of the development fees and all the other closing costs, but you are going to get it back, and that time period is usually anywhere between 6 and 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks. Okay, perfect. So the last item when it comes to what to look for is going to be the topic of the mortgage letter. And I know a lot of builders, and you've worked with builders, that they've asked for this letter specifically, but it's not technically a firm approval. But what is it exactly? Why are they asking for it?
So the developer, in most cases, is getting construction financing from a lender, from a bank, in most cases, right? And so to get that construction financing, the lender, particularly now, this wasn't always the case, say, 7, 8 years ago when I started selling condos, but we're seeing more and more of them. So the lender wants to protect themselves. And to protect themselves, they say to the builder, we'll give you your construction financing, but how do we know who all these purchasers are? You told us that you sold 80% of the building, but I don't know who Ahsan is, the purchaser. Does Ahsan have a job, and does he make money, or are these fake buyers? Like, who are these people? Right. And so they have the buyers go through the process of getting a mortgage pre-approval letter. You're right, and that is really not worth the paper it's printed on, because regardless, you're going to have to go through the process when you actually close in 3-4 years. And so even though you might be able to get the letter today, that doesn't guarantee you'll get it in the future. Maybe you go out and buy some fancy cars and some fancy shoes and you no longer can afford the condo, in which case you can't get a mortgage then. But for some reason, the lender wants it now, and so you are required to kind of fill out an application with a mortgage broker or go to your bank and get one of these letters.
Now, this is going to be probably my favorite part of this discussion is going to be how you're actually going to build wealth with pre-construction and why this strategy could work for you if that's what your aim is. So what are some ways, Laura, that you can actually build wealth through the pre-construction strategy?
This is my favorite part too.
Mine too.
So this is kind of the whole point, right?
Yeah.
We're investors and we want to be making money on our investments. I already mentioned to you the forced appreciation that happens because of the development.
Pricing, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's obviously one way that you win. The second way you win in this opportunity is that you don't need a mortgage. And so a lot of investors or a lot of people who want to be investors will say, look, I'm maxed out right now. There's no way I can get a mortgage. Either I own too many properties already, or I just lost my job, or I'm transitioning, or I'm a real estate agent. I don't have 3 years yet worth of income for me to showcase, so there's no way I can get a mortgage. The beauty about this is you don't need a mortgage today. You only need the mortgage when you close. Yes, you got to go down that formality, but I mean, work with a good mortgage broker, you can figure it out. But yeah, you don't really need the mortgage until you close. And so this gives you time to get all of your ducks in a row over the course of the build out period so that when closing does come, you can get that mortgage easily.
Yep.
The second way is probably through the deposit structure. So that's an incentive as well that developers offer, and they look differently. So not all structures are the same. But the good news is, with this compared to, say, a resale property, say you were buying an income property today, you signed for something and you're closing in, 60 to 90 days usually? You actually need, as an investor, the full 20%.
Right.
You're not buying this with 5% down. You need at least 20% down to buy an income property. Some people are just not in the place where they've saved that much money yet. And the problem that happens with a lot of people who want to get into the real estate market is they say, well, I'll keep saving. I got to save more. I got to save more. The problem is your income and your ability to save is not matching the rate at which values are going up. And so you're getting further and further and further behind. The great news with pre-construction is that you can actually lock in today's pricing without putting the full 20% down. So you'll put down 5% in 30 days, 5% anywhere between 90 and 180 days, maybe another 5% in 120 days or a little bit longer. And sometimes you'll even get it where the final 5% isn't due until occupancy, which is 3-4 years out. So it's an amazing way, like I said, to get into the market today without actually having to pay for it.
Yep. And like I always refer back to my own example when I first got into the market. And it was funny because the way I bought that property was I was going with the client. And he ended up buying 2 properties. And then he asked me, he was like, how come you're not buying the property? And I was always fearful to get into the market, but here I was helping others get into the market. And so I looked at the deposit structure. It was about maybe 5%, then $30,000 in 1 month was exactly all I had in my savings. I put that $30,000 in, scared as hell, right? Mm-hmm. But after 6 months, that $30,000 actually gave me the investment in return because the property values went up from $430,000 to about $470,000. So I put in $30,000. I made $40,000 on top, which was more than 100% of my return on investment. I think that's, for me, was one of the most exciting ways that I actually built wealth in the real estate game. Then that allows you to kind of do other things later on, buy more properties and whatnot. So I know you've also had that same, experience.
Yeah, that's that cash on cash return,
Cash on cash return,
people always look at the big picture, what's my ROI year one? And I'm thinking, that's obviously important, and that's how you're going to compare perhaps pre-construction to something else. But you have to look at the fact that you only put $30,000 down and you made $40,000.
Exactly.
And you didn't have to landlord. I mean, this is a very, very passive approach to investing. So people like us who are busy on weekends and evenings, we don't necessarily have the time or the mental bandwidth to want to do it. And it's not to say it's right for everybody, but there's a lot of people who I think are scared to be landlords, and this allows them to kind of be an investor without really being a landlord just yet. And the even better news is, even once the building's built, yes, you do have to find tenants, but based on you getting in a great location, you should be able to find some really good tenants. but you don't, nothing really goes wrong in a new building. Like the stove is new, the toilets are new. So it's not like you're fixing eaves troughs and dealing with floods, if ever, but particularly at the start when everything's new.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's also possible that when you do invest, property values may not go up one year, right? Things can happen, like pandemic, you said 3.0 or whatever. But, if you look at the history of, GTA real estate in the last decade or so, property values have doubled. Actually, in the last 5 years have doubled. And so again, if you buy, you hold, you will see that appreciation, but it's all about that, I guess, mental aspect of it, just having that faith that your property value is going to go up over time. And that's how we promote the buy and hold strategy. So that is, in a nutshell, our episode on pre-construction property, but I'm not going to let you go so fast, Laura. I've got a few questions, which I always ask my guests, just to kind of get to know you more and get your personality. So a few rapid fire questions, if you don't mind.
All right.
So first question is, if you weren't doing real estate, what would be your dream job?
Oh my. Well, I'll tell you what my dream job was when I was a kid. I wanted to be in the Olympics so badly.
Okay.
I thought that would be the coolest thing, to win a gold medal for your country.
Nice. Any specific sport or?
Any sport. I would have taken a gold medal in curling. It really didn't matter. But probably for me, it would have been somewhere in the diving or gymnastics sector, because I'm 5 feet tall. So that was pretty much the only sport I could do.
Okay. Now, next subject or next question is, what's your favorite book that you read in the past that you would recommend?
Probably the book that I find I return back to every single year is by James Clear, Atomic Habits.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of people talk about this book, so I'm sure most of your viewers and listeners have heard of it. Yep. It really is just telling you the concept of building up small habits every single day that compound over time. And my background's actually in nutrition, believe it or not. And so this kind of always resonated with me, because a lot of people had always come to me wanting what's the secret to losing weight? What's the diet thing that I can take? What's the pill? What's the gummy? Or what's the workout regimen? And there really is no fast way to do it. It's just doing the things that you already know what to do, which is eat fruits and vegetables and do all that boring stuff, but do it consistently over time. Yeah. And that's going to get you the result, and the result that actually sticks. And the same thing, ironically, goes for real estate. Having that patience, you just kind of got to wait it out and know and be confident in what you're doing and wait it out that time. So to me, that book really resonates with me. Okay.
And what's your favorite movie that you like to watch over and over again?
You know what? I'm not really a big movie person.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
It's gotta be one.
I kind of don't really like movies.
No way. TV show?
I'm a TV show person.
TV show. What's your favorite TV show?
My favorite TV show of all time, and I've probably watched it 4 times, all 8 seasons or 7 seasons, Sopranos.
Sopranos. I haven't watched that. I know. I have not watched that.
It's the best. I mean, it's a little dated now. Now when you watch it, it's kind of humorous, but I don't know. Maybe I have a weird
I've been a movie guy mostly, so I haven't watched a lot of shows, but movies are my kind of thing.
Gotcha.
But it's something on my
I like the character building.
Yeah,
I want to be married to these people over the course of years of my life and watch them grow up, and we grew up together. I don't know. Yeah. It's like a relationship through the TV.
Sopranos, I'll check it out. Last question. What's the best piece of advice someone has given you?
Of late, the best piece of advice I've heard is probably from my business partner. And he says it again and again and again, and so I'm kind of stealing it from him. But he lives by the concept of ready, fire, aim versus ready, aim, fire. I've always been that type of student who I kind of followed the rules and did things the way they were supposed to. But unfortunately, what happened to me was that I got paralysis by analysis, or I started to want things to be perfect before I did anything. And when you don't do stuff, you can't learn and you can't fail forward. And so he, over the course of the last 8 years, has really kind of pushed me to do something. Just start. Yeah. Don't worry about what everyone's going to say, which is, most of these things come from a level of fear. Yeah. I fear that my friends might say something, or my parents, or my in-laws, whoever it is, or just the public in general. And so I think it's really important to take that first step and just to keep kind of going and get over kind of that fear. So ready, fire, aim.
Ready, fire, aim. That's a great way to cap off this discussion. If you're in pre-construction looking for an investment, ready, fire, aim. right? Don't be scared and just go for it. Any questions, give us a shout. Be happy to help you out. And thank you for listening in.